Good evening. It's Blair. It's late, isn't it? There's a special kind of quiet that only exists in these hours, a stillness that makes you wonder what's just beyond the edge of the light. Tonight, we're going to venture into that darkness, to the edge of the water, where some people found something waiting for them. Our first story comes from a listener who, for a time, had found his own little piece of heaven. He called it Daryl's Pond. It wasn't its real name, of course. It was just a remote little body of water, tucked away and forgotten, the kind of place you can only find if you're looking for solitude. And for a young man with a kayak, it was perfect. Picture it, the gentle lapping of water against the plastic hull, the rhythmic dip and pull of the paddle. The air thick with the smell of damp earth and greenery. He'd spend hours out there, just gliding across the glassy surface, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin, a world away from everything. It was a ritual of peace, a baptism in silence. One afternoon, the silence was broken. Another boat appeared at the far end of the pond. It was an old, beaten-up rowboat, and in it, an older man. The narrator gave a friendly wave. The man just stared back. No wave, no nod, just a blank, fixed gaze. He tried to ignore it, to reclaim his peace, but the feeling was gone. That feeling of being alone was replaced by a new one, the feeling of being watched. The man in the rowboat began to paddle, not fishing, not enjoying the scenery, just moving, slowly, deliberately, in his direction. He'd ask a question, and the man's answers were clipped, strange. Catch anything? Not yet. Nice day for it. It's a day. Each word landed like a stone in the quiet water, heavy and out of place. The man's eyes never wavered. They were pale and seemed to hold a kind of unnerving emptiness. Then the space between them began to shrink. The man rowed closer and closer still, until the wooden edge of his rowboat bumped against the narrator's kayak with a dull thud. The sound was a violation. In the vastness of the pond, there was no reason for this proximity. The narrator's heart began to hammer against his ribs. This wasn't friendly. This wasn't a coincidence. The air turned cold. "I think I'm gonna head in," he said, his voice tight, trying to sound casual. He started to paddle, to turn his kayak towards the shore, towards his car, towards safety. But the man moved with him, his own boat shadowing, blocking his path. And then the man spoke, his voice as flat and empty as his eyes. "I can't let you leave." It's a sentence that doesn't belong in the real world. It belongs in a nightmare. As the narrator stared, frozen, the man lifted the hem of his loose, grimy shirt. Tucked into the waistband of his jeans was the dark, unmistakable handle of a handgun. Time shattered. Thought dissolved into pure animal instinct. There was no plan, no strategy. He just reacted. He threw himself out of the kayak into the shocking cold of the pond water. He didn't swim. He ran, churning through the waist-deep murk, stumbling on unseen rocks, his lungs burning. He didn't look back. The only thing in his mind was the image of that gun and the sound of that voice. He burst from the trees and scrambled into his car, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely fit it in the ignition. He tore out of there, leaving his kayak, his gear, everything behind. He just drove. But the horror wasn't over. It had followed him. That night, he sat in his house, every light off, every door locked. He was on the second floor, in his bedroom, peering through a crack in the blinds at the dark, empty street below. Hours passed. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a creeping, suffocating paranoia. Was he crazy? Did he overreact? Then, a sound. The soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel driveway below. He held his breath, his blood turning to ice. The footsteps stopped directly beneath his window. A silence stretched, thick and terrifying. And then a voice drifted up through the dark, casual, conversational, and utterly monstrous. "Hey, buddy, you up there?" That was a story of a monster you could see coming. A direct, unambiguous threat that declared itself. But sometimes the real danger is the one you invite in yourself. The one that wears a smile and asks for your help. Our second story comes from a man who was 17 at the time. A difficult age. You're caught between the world of a child and the world of an adult, with the responsibilities of one but the power of neither. He was spending a week with his older sister and her husband, a man named Jack. Jack was successful. One of those people for whom life seemed to be an effortless accumulation of expensive toys, the biggest of which was his boat, a gleaming luxury vessel he'd named Lexi. This wasn't a fishing trip, it was a floating party. Jack and his friends were cut from the same cloth, loud, confident, and dedicated to the pursuit of getting as drunk and as high as possible. For the narrator, a sober 17-year-old, it was a special kind of hell. He felt like a ghost at the feast, an awkward observer in a world he didn't belong to, surrounded by the braying laughter and slurred conversations of people who were rapidly losing touch with reality. He found his solace in fishing off the side of the boat, a quiet act of rebellion against the chaos. The others paid him no mind, lost in their own hazy world of booze and smoke. He felt a growing sense of annoyance, but also a deeper unease. He was the only one with his feet on the ground, so to speak, the only one who could see the carelessness, the sheer foolish vulnerability of their situation. A boat full of incapacitated people floating in the middle of a vast, indifferent ocean. A perfect target. As the sun bled out across the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes, the party only grew louder. But as night fell, a deep, profound blackness enveloped them. The shore was a distant memory. There was only the boat, a tiny island of light and noise in an endless, silent expanse of dark water. The narrator felt a profound sense of isolation, a primal fear that the cheerful drunks in the cabin seemed immune to. And then they heard it, a cry, faint but clear, drifting across the water. "Help! Please!" Everyone quieted for a moment. Jack, bleary-eyed, stumbled to the railing. Out in the darkness, a small light flickered. As it got closer, they could make out a small, simple fishing boat, much smaller than theirs, with 2 men on board. They pulled up alongside, and their story came spilling out. They'd been out all day, misjudged their fuel, ran out of food. They were exhausted, scared. They just needed a little gas to get back to shore, maybe some water. They looked harmless, desperate. Inside the narrator, a war was raging. Every instinct, every fiber of his being screamed that this was wrong. The story was too neat, the situation too perfect. But what was the alternative? To just sail away and leave them stranded? What if they were telling the truth? Their fate would be on his hands. He looked at Jack and the others. They were too far gone to make a rational decision. Their response was a slurry of drunken sympathy. "Of course we have to help them, man." The burden, the choice, fell squarely on his 17-year-old shoulders. That's the worst kind of prison, isn't it? When your own conscience is the cage. This is a tough spot. What would you do? Let us know in the comments if you would have helped them or just sailed away. He made a choice. The choice a good person is supposed to make. He pushed his doubts down and helped the 2 men aboard. They were overwhelmingly grateful. His sister gave them leftover burgers from the grill. He found a spare can of gasoline for them. They thanked everyone profusely, climbed back into their little boat, and motored off into the darkness, waving until they were just a disappearing light. On the Lexi, a wave of self-congratulatory relief washed over the group. They had done a good deed. They were heroes. The party resumed, even louder than before, but the narrator couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It coiled in his stomach like a cold snake. He had opened the door, and he wasn't sure he had been able to close it again. For a while, it seemed like his fears were unfounded. The men were gone. The night wore on. One by one, the drunken partygoers stumbled off to their bunks until only the quiet hum of the generator and the gentle rocking of the waves remained. They made their choice, and for a while, it seemed like the right one. But the ocean holds its secrets, and that night, it wasn't done with them. He couldn't sleep. The unease was still crawling under his skin. He left his bunk and went out onto the main deck, seeking the cool night air. The silence was absolute. A vast velvet blackness stretched out in every direction, the stars above like chips of ice. It was beautiful and terrifying. and it wasn't silent for long. At first, it was just a faint vibration, a low hum on the edge of hearing. He strained his ears, telling himself it was just the boat's own machinery. But it grew. It became the unmistakable rhythmic chug of a small boat motor. And it was getting closer. His heart began to pound, a frantic, suffocating rhythm. No, it couldn't be. He scrambled to the helm, his hands finding the switch for the boat's main searchlight. A powerful, brilliant white beam cut through the oppressive darkness, sweeping across the inky, rolling waves. He swung it back and forth, a desperate lighthouse beam, scanning for a ghost. Left, right, nothing, just endless, empty water. He was about to give up, to convince himself he was imagining it, when the beam caught something. There it was, the small fishing boat. And it was heading directly for them. In that exact, heart-stopping moment, a sound erupted from inside the cabin that was far more terrifying than the approaching boat. A scream, a raw, blood-curdling shriek of pure terror that tore through the night. He didn't even think. He bolted from the helm and burst into the cabin. It was chaos. One of Jack's friends was scrambling backward off his couch, his face a mask of horror, pointing a trembling finger. There were two guys. They were standing right over me. The narrator rushed back out. The boat was gone. Vanished back into the darkness from which it came. He and Jack, now violently sobered by the scream, turned the cabin upside down. What did they take? They checked everything. The expensive electronics were all there. The fishing gear. Nothing seemed to be missing. They found a few cans of gas were gone from a storage locker. That was it. A wave of confusion mixed with relief settled over them. They came all the way back for a few cans of gas? And then Jack went still. His face went pale. He started patting his pockets, a frantic, desperate motion. First his pants, then his shirt. Nothing. My wallet, he stammered. I left my wallet on the kitchen table. They rushed to the small galley kitchen. The table was empty, and as they stood there, the full, sickening weight of the situation crashed down on them. It wasn't just the wallet. The narrator remembered seeing it earlier. Jack's entire keyring, the thick, heavy chain with the keys to his house, his office, his cars, had been attached to it. The men hadn't just come back for gas. They had come back for a map. They had come back for an invitation. The horror wasn't on the boat anymore. They now knew exactly where Jack lived, and they had the keys to let themselves in. The most terrifying monsters are often human. Their motives, while evil, are usually understandable. Greed, malice, opportunity. But what about the ones that aren't? The ones that defy explanation, that come from a place so far outside our understanding that they leave a wound on reality itself. Our final story is short. It's a fragment of a memory from a man looking back on a day with his grandfather. His grandpa was 84 years old, a man who had lived a long, hard life and had spent most of it with a fishing rod in his hand. He was a fisherman in the way that some men are priests or soldiers. It was his calling. He knew every river, every lake, every secret spot for miles around. One day, he took his grandson for the very first time to one of these secret places, a desolate, hidden lake surrounded by thick, ancient woods. There was no path. They had to drag their small boat through the undergrowth to reach the water's edge. The place felt old, untouched. The water was dark and unnaturally still. They paddled out to the center and cast their lines. For a while, it was peaceful, but the grandson noticed a change in his grandfather. The old man, usually relaxed and talkative while fishing, was silent, tense. He was leaning over the edge of the boat, staring intently down into the dark water, his focus absolute. He wasn't fishing anymore. He was watching something. Suddenly, there was a splash. It wasn't the sound of a fish jumping. It was heavier, more deliberate. Before the grandson could even process it, his grandfather yelled, his voice raw with a kind of terror the boy had never heard before. "Paddle, now! Get to the shore!" There was no room for questions. The fear in the old man's voice was a physical thing. The boy paddled with all his might, his young arms burning. His grandfather didn't help. He was crouched in the boat, staring back at the spot they'd just left, his face as white as bone. They hit the shore with a jolt, scrambled out and ran, leaving everything behind. The rods, the tackle box, the boat, everything. They didn't speak about it on the long walk back. They didn't speak about it for weeks. The grandfather was a changed man. The light in his eyes had dimmed. He never fished again. Finally, one night, the grandson got up the courage to ask, "Grandpa, what happened? What did you see in the water that day?" The old man was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant, looking at a memory he clearly wished he didn't have. When he finally spoke, his voice was a dry, trembling whisper. "I saw a shape," he said, "down in the water. It was getting closer. I kept leaning over, trying to make it out, and I could swear it looked like a human face." He paused, swallowing hard. Just as I leaned in close, something reached up out of the water, and it grabbed me. He fell silent again, his hand unconsciously rubbing his arm. The grandson waited, his own heart pounding. "What was it, Grandpa? A big catfish? A turtle?" The old man slowly shook his head and looked his grandson in the eye. And in his gaze was a fear so profound, so ancient, it chilled the boy to his very soul. "I don't know what it was," he said. "All I know is it wasn't no fish." A stalker with a gun. Cunning thieves who turn kindness into a weapon. And something else. Something ancient and unknown lurking in the depths. 3 fishing trips. 3 encounters at the edge of the world that prove the most peaceful places can hide the deepest fears. And the horror doesn't always stay where it began. The story of the boat trip has a postscript. Weeks after that terrifying night, Jack's home security system sent an alert to his phone. The cameras had captured footage from 2 in the morning. The video showed 2 men in dark hoodies walking calmly up to his front door. One of them reached into his pocket, pulled out a set of keys, and tried them in the lock. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a moment out in the quiet places where you felt you weren't truly alone? If you want to continue exploring these dark corners with me, the most helpful thing you can do is subscribe and perhaps hit the like button. It tells the great, unfeeling algorithm that we're gathered here and that we want more stories like this. And you know how it is with these kinds of tales. They have a way of disappearing. So if this story resonated with you, consider saving it. Just in case. Sleep well.